Hey yo, what it did, y'all? Let's get right into it. As I realized that BPL is coming up this weekend and I've been evaluating a lot of my options for what Sanctum Runner I wanted to do, I realized I hadn't really given you guys my thoughts on Sanctum Runners as a whole, what makes a good Sanctum Runner, what I think of currently used Sanctum Runners, as well as skills that I think could definitely be used as Sanctum Runners, either now if you're feeling quirky or just, in the future, should some things get nerfed, just to give you some ideas of what to look for in a build. So I figured this would be a great time to share some of the thoughts from my research, as well as, give you guys all of my thoughts, right? Now, before I get into all of that, hey, look, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications on if you want to know when we post more. The most important thing really is just the liking and commenting. I'm trying to get the video out there so people can actually see specifically how many options for Sanctum there really are if they are not particularly in love with the current main archetypes and builds out there. Now, let's get into it. First thing we have to talk about is the basis under which I rate these skills, because I will give these like a proper rating because everything's rated out of 5 and then they'll be summed up at the end when I give you guys my overall thoughts. So there are 4 main categories to talk about: damage, cost, speed, playstyle. Damage is exactly what it sounds like. Its ability to deal damage. There's 2 specific things that I'm looking for here. 1, does this skill easily get to the amount of damage needed to instantly phase through Lycia in an I-83 tome should you have taken both the afflictions that give you less damage and more life? If yes, this is a good contending point. And then the second thing becomes really, how excessive does that damage get? Because obviously excessive damage is like damage is hot. If you're doing like a Winds of Fate run, for example, having excessive damage is always nice. But more importantly really is that if your damage becomes really excessive here, it does mean that this character is able to become flexible for other content due to the fact that, well, you don't need to get more damage for Sanctum, right? If you're already at 65, 70 million DPS, you could go up, or you could just make your character better for other content and become a strong, well-rounded character. Next up, speaking of well-roundedness and whatnot, is cost. The actual cost of getting your character to what I consider to be like minimum viability in Sanctum, as well as how much does it take to really like scale your character. This is mostly a category where having a high cost obviously is a negative. You want skills that are lower cost, at least, at a baseline. Sometimes you do want skills that scale insanely well, but specifically for this category, I'm talking about it in the sense that the less it costs to get you into the door, the better. Then we have speed, because speed is just as important, if not more important, than the damage of your character when we're talking about Sanctum. You straight up just have to actually traverse a large amount of distance, including multiple runs where you're actually not aiming to kill much of anything. And so therefore, speed becomes a very, very important factor in the math here. Most of these ratings are based off of either the speed of the playstyle of the skill itself or the speed of the skills available to it, and both parts of that puzzle weigh in on how I feel about the speed of a skill. And then there's the playstyle itself, because it's worth noting that speed and playstyle are, well, together, they're not exactly the same thing. Playstyle refers to some of the more mechanical advantages or disadvantages of an archetype, just given the way that the skill needs to be played in order to function. It's worth noting that every skill on this list is far and above many other skills in terms of playstyle, just due to mechanical things. But so that their ratings are more relative to each other than they are absolute numbers, if that makes sense, except for one. And one of them is a preference that I absolutely hate, to be honest with you. Alrighty, all that said, after I go through all of these categories individually, I will then, talk about the skills overall at the end. I think it's just easier to go through and talk about each category of scoring, and then boop, at the end, talk about the skills based off of their category performances. Let's get into it. Next up, we have cost. Reminder, this is a section talking about how much money does it take to really get a build going, right? How much money does it take to get the build into the content? How much money does it take to to get to where it really wants to be to perform well in in the Sanctum. And so starting out with Hexblast Mines, obviously another 5 out of 5. The build is extremely cost efficient. The only real downside in terms of like cost here would be the need for Sandstorm Visage to really skyrocket the damage, except for the part where there are several PLBs that are hitting 10 to 15 million DPS without Sandstorm Visage and without too high of investment in other pieces anyways, and then using Sandstorm to launch into the 40, 45, 50 bracket, which is the bracket that you should be expecting to hit anyways if you want to like really push that damage. And it's worth noting that even I'm seeing this point in the league 1 div characters that are breaching 50 million DPS on Hexblast Mines. This archetype is absolutely insane in terms of its cost efficiency, just due to the fact that mines as an archetype are extremely well loaded with damage, and Hexblast as a skill is perfectly positioned to abuse mines as a damage source. So 5 out of 5, not a lot that needs to be said there. Next up, Penance Brand of Dissipation. I'm giving it a 1 here, and it's mostly because of perception. Personally, I find it to be closer to a 2, maybe a 2.5 in terms of the currency needed to really get it online. But Penance Brand of Dissipation does have a ramp time at up to which it does feel good. Ability to perform and ability to feel good are very much separated within this skill, I find. And so I've decided to rate this skill based on its ability to scale in this category, due to the fact that it does really feel like a build that can soak up infinite money, as opposed to a build that like forms very easily put together. I have some things about that, but you know, that's where we're going to rate it here for now. 1 out of 5. Bama, 4 out of 5. It's pretty cheap in a lot of regards. I have it at 4 specifically due to the fact that if you are looking at playing it in the poison variant to start out with in the Sanctum, you really want Kurgle's Amanamu's Gaze in order to scale your damage really hard. And that's kind of like one of the bigger walls that you're going to feel in terms of damage scaling. And that's not a cheap item nor an easy to get item in SF. And so like that's kind of why I have that here at 4 as opposed to 5, compared to Hexblast at 5. Even though it has a really strong helmet, it wants, because it actually farms its own helmet in the content that it's doing very reliably. I think that makes a little bit of sense. But otherwise, Bama, very cost efficient skill, very nice skill to play at all times. Shockwave Totem, also a 4 out of 5. This one's a little bit of a strange category. It falls in the same bracket as Bama, in the sense that Shockwave Totem does not function without Astral Projector, not in the way that you want. There are a shit ton of better totem skills for this if you do not have Astral Projector, but with Astral Projector, it very much takes off. And so that requirement of an item puts it in a weird place where I don't really want to put it in 5 out of 5. Because it does actually need more gear to get to the damage that you really want. Like you really want to get, you know, +1 Shaper Shield or +1 Totem Shaper Shield, for example, things of that nature, or just really good weapons. You're going to really want the rest of your like setup to be strong, because the skill itself is a little bit weaker than it used to be, and some of the uniques around it got nerfed down. So it takes a little bit more money to get it into that cranking spot. But once you get it there, it is fantastic. So 4 out of 5 here. And last on the list, SRS, also a 4 out of 5, because this is about the ability to get to where it's going. And as a build, this build is not known for being absolutely ridiculous in Sanctum. It is just a strong playstyle. Minion scaling is very aggressively simple to get into. And so 4 out of 5 definitely makes sense to me here, as there's not a lot that you actually need to do to get this character into the Sanctum, besides regular gearing practices. All right, just to quickly recap this before we go on: Hexblast Mines at 5, Penance Brand at 1, Bama at 4, Shockwave Totem at 4, SRS at 4, all of these in terms of cost. All right, so up first we have damage, right? Again, reminder, damage is about literally damage numbers. And so we'll start off with the first skill on the list here, Hexblast Mines, in that I think it is a fantastic damage skill. I actually don't think there are very many skills that do it better. There is one that comes to mind immediately, but Hexblast Mines' damage is so absurd that oftentimes when I've played it, I think 3 times now, I find myself just straight not investing in more damage, simply because it's always so excessive with just the efficient slots to get damage out of, and allows me to do other things with the character at that point. And so I'm rating this a very high 5 out of 5 just to begin with. It's also worth noting that due to the fact that it can all be preloaded damage, it is extremely easy to instantly face bosses with it, as opposed to some of the other options that exist within the game. Next up, Penance Brand of Dissipation. This is another 5 out of 5 for me. The damage on this, particularly at its ceiling, is ridiculous. I will acknowledge that on the mid and lower end, its damage is not as ridiculous, but this is a full holistic category as opposed to the talk about cost later on. And so Penance Brand of Dissipation absolutely deserves a 5 out of 5 for how absurd its damage gets in the long term, especially with how fast it actually gets out there. Next up, we have Bama. Bama, I'm giving a 4 out of 5 on its damage, and it's simply just because I think the damage of Bama is really high, but if you play Poison, it is capped, and that's the easier way to get in. And if you play Elemental, it does get pretty high, specifically once you've loaded up tons of clones. There are clips of, you know, Bama plus Mirror Arrow, Bama just literally layering about 20 something clones next to the boss, and that does do some insane damage as well. Shockwave Totem, I'm also giving a 4 out of 5 because it is a skill with very good damage scaling. It doesn't get particularly absurd, but I do not find myself struggling to hit excessive damage or the Lycia insta-phase threshold at all. It's just not as ridiculous anymore between changes to things like Heat Shiver in the past. The Hatred change was actually not the worst thing in the world for, but it is definitely felt in an aura scaling environment. So there's a couple other options you have to take in order to get the damage up that high, but I find that the build has plenty of avenues to really like skyrocket its damage, and therefore I think it definitely deserves this score. And then lastly, out of the 5 skills that I'll be covering, at least in this, you know, before the end section, SRS, 3 out of 5. I think the damage is perfectly fine. I think the damage is more than serviceable. I do not think the damage gets anywhere near excessive, and I honestly could give it a 2, but because I have seen SRS characters very, very comfortably absolutely annihilate Lycia anyways, I'm willing to give it a 3 out of 5. A part of the damage, actually, the reason the damage is not a big thing for me is actually the damage on guards in some cases. I feel like it's a little lackluster due to the way that they target and the fact that you don't want to run melee splash and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so quick recap of the damage section. Hexblast at 5, Penance Brand at 5, Bama at 4, Shockwave Totem at 4, SRS at 3. Got it, good. Next one. All right, let's talk about speed next. So remember, speed, literally talking about your ability to get through the Sanctum, and now technically every skill, every build in the game can score a 5 out of 5 in this category with the right amount of investment and the right types of investments into the character. I am rating this primarily either on my own decisions when playing the character, the ability to make those decisions without sacrificing too much in other regards, or just what I see to be common practice that I think is a little concerning for said archetypes. So starting out at number 1, we are talking about Hexblast Mines. I've given this a 4 out of 5 in this category. This has to do specifically with how long it takes, I feel like, to get to the point where you can move to Lightning Warp as your movement skill. If you've seen my character from this league, you'll know that I am using Lightning Warp on my Hexblast Miner for a Sanctum instead of, say, Flame Dash, Shield Charge, Frost Blink, etc. Using Lightning Warp as the main traversal skill puts this at a 5 out of 5. However, you will play an extended amount of time on Shield Charge on lower investment, especially while running something like Doju's Tenure. And even once getting Doju's Tenure off, you're still going to want to try to make the cast speed a little bit stronger, whether that be through 8 Mage Blood or just through having a Silver Flask active. You want to try to like really juice up your Lightning Warp. And so for that reason, I have the skill here at a 4 out of 5, as opposed to what could be a 5 out of 5 based off of the character that I played in the league. There's also another reason why it's not 5 out of 5, and that's because the next skill on the list here is Penance Brand of Dissipation at 5 out of 5, specifically because of how much cast speed the skill wants. Because the skill wants so much cast speed, right? If you're not aware of how Penance Brand of Dissipation scales, it scales very, very hard off of cast speed to get to its maximum ramp damage before its duration expires. And so because of that, you are scaling all that cast speed that you can then funnel into your Lightning Warp, cut its duration ridiculously with gem levels, quality, as well as good supporting, and the skill goes absolutely insane in terms of its ability to traverse the zone. That's why we have Penance Bandit 5. It's also usually leans into a charged darkening archetype, which is even more cast speed, etc. You get the idea that I'm going for here. Next up, Bama, 3 out of 5. And it's weird to have it rated below Hexblast Mines, but it has to do with the mobility that it chooses. Bama being a bow skill that is literally using one of its main movement skills as its damage source in Blink Arrow. I find that having Blink Arrow as a damage source is a bit of an implicit negative when it comes to clearing Sanctum, specifically due to the fact that if you actually need to kill things and sometimes you Blink Arrow and now it's down and you need to move through, as well as only having Blink Arrow and Frostblink because you don't have a proper spammable movement skill. You have very low cooldown on it due to the way that you're scaling the skill's damage, but you don't actually have it permanently up like, say, a Lightning Warp, like a Shield Charge, like a Leap Slam would be, like a Whirling Blades even would be. And last on this list here is SRS. I've given this a 1 out of 5 because I have yet to see somebody show me a SRS character in Sanctum that is actually appealingly fast. It is you know, very compact, very good at doing the job, but it is not fast about it. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that you don't benefit a lot from your own cast speed scaling. I haven't really seen people go with like Leaf Slam or anything. It's really just Shield Charge. And I think Shield Charge is a very mediocre skill for Sanctum, especially if you're not really scaling movement speed. Like that skill really wants you to actually have movement speed as opposed to just fake stats. So not super sold on it there either in terms of speed. All right, recap. Hexblast at 4, Penance Brand at 5, Bama at 3, Shockwave at 5, SRS at 1. And last but certainly not least is now the playstyle section. Remember, this is about a lot of the mechanical things that the skills do that set them apart from one another and other skills in the game just in general. It's worth noting again, these ratings are not super indicative of how perfect the playstyle is because of the fact that all of these skills on the list already have advantageous playstyles for the Sanctum. That's just kind of a part of what makes it good for specializing in this content. And so you're going to see me kind of adopt. Some of these might be rated a little weirdly, but know that they're still better than a lot of other options in this category. So now, starting with Hexblast Mines, I've given this a 5 out of 5. This could be argued down to a 4 or 4.5 depending on who you are, but I'm going to give it a 5, and it is because at the time of recording, automation support or automation is still in the game, which means it is a 1-button build with immense auto-targeting range. And that's the big thing. It auto-targets, it's around walls, it's past barriers, right? Like you don't actually have to do any of the aiming. You don't even really have to be like within the same zip codes as the things that you're trying to kill with these mines. And that is the strength. You don't want to actually interact with targets. Hexblast gets an easy 5 out of 5 for me in this category. Penance Brand of Dissipation, also a 5 out of 5. Very similar reason, but not of a different art, which is that the speed of the character actually contributes a lot to the playstyle here, but also more specifically, the way that brand attachment range scales. Brand attachment range is a ridiculous stat because it not only will scale the base attachment range of a brand that is placed on the ground, but with the mastery, I was almost about to call it the notable Holy Conquest from back when it was on the clusters, but that mastery note that gives you the jumps every activation is really strong with the skill, as the brand attachment range really like ramps that up so that it just pew 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 will absolutely annihilate battle arenas in very few casts, as well as specifically just being very comfortable for getting around corners in various like kill rooms. Very strong skill for this, 5 out of 5 for sure. Bama, 4 out of 5. It's a fast minion playstyle, and I love both parts of that sentence. The minion playstyle makes it a lot safer than other options, as well as specifically the fact that it does really blot out the screen when you're playing in specifically like battle arenas, for example, battle arenas, boss fights, etc. Just the fact that it like absolutely pins down the entire area with damage very passively air quote. I say like you're not spamming more mirror arrows and blink arrows to continue doing it, but that's like the thing that this skill is strong for, and I rate it very highly because of that factor. So 4 out of 5. Shockwave Totem also gets a 4 out of 5, specifically because I think while it's mechanically advantaged in the ability to actually target around corners, I find that totems themselves are a little clunky. It's Something about the base firing rate of a totem, even with the amount of cast speed that you do scale on the character, it's just not it's not quite all there in terms of like placement speed and other things. It just does not feel as snappy as say mind throwing speed does, even though they're roughly the same concept of delayed damage. So I give it a 4 out of 5 there, because otherwise it is a fantastic archetype for it, right? It aims for you. It can do it around corners, much like a lot of the others. SRS in this category also gets a 1 out of 5. You're going to find a very common trend here. I do not like this skill. It is good in Sanctum, but it is not particularly comfortable to play. You are constantly casting in order to actually get your SRS up to do damage, which is a lot of time spent doing that. They don't move very fast. That is partially on the fault of the players for not actually investing in minion movement speed, but I can only really rate based off of what I've seen, and not just purely off of theory, because if I rate purely off of theory, I'm going to confuse you guys with the way that this list will be constructed, just based off of some of the things that I've seen in testing or really good POB sessions. So 1 out of 5, because I don't think that the skill actually really belongs in the Sanctum from a playstyle perspective. It just simply is capable of doing so because the minions are minions. You know what I mean? Like, that's about all there is to it. So recap here: playstyle, Hexblast 5 out of 5, Penance 5 out of 5, Bama 4 out of 5, Shockwave Totem 4 out of 5, SRS 1 out of 5. All right, so let's talk about these skills overall, in which I can give actually a little bit more detail about some of these things, because one of the things that you might notice if you've watched the whole thing is that I've never actually mentioned ascendancies on these builds, and that's very intentional, because I think some of these skills deserve like special attention on the fact that there are multiple ascendancies and multiple build paths available for them that allow them to do this content. But we'll get into that as we go through each individual skill. So starting out with Hexblast, our #1 skill, at least numerically speaking here. And honestly, I would rate this as my #1 Sanctum skill, just personally speaking. 19 out of 20 points. The only knock that it really took was in the regard of its speed, specifically due to the investment point at which it gets to the speed that I like. Very, very strong skill. I mean, if you've been on the channel for a while, you know that I rate this skill extremely highly. One of my favorite skills of all time right now. And it's very fast, very strong, very flexible in terms of ascendancy paths, as you can go a wide variety of ascendancies: occultist, assassin, trickster, to name them big 3, depending on the content you intend to do and how fast you want to do it and where you want to do it or what character you already have leveled, as well as do not sleep on Inquisitor. Hexblast a contradiction. Just because Lance hasn't played it this league yet does not mean it is nerfed in any way. He just simply has decided not to play it so far this league. Shit's still insane, but it is slow, and that's why it's not particularly my favorite method of playing it. As well as I've seen Pathfinder variants, which again, not really my personal favorite way of playing it, but just know that those variants are also very solid and therefore deserve to be acknowledged here. The flexibility of build path and options for this skill, fantastic. The ability to take the skill out of the Sanctum and cut its damage by a potentially a large sounding percentage and still have over 50 million DPS and go do all content is insane. Overall, this skill is just absolutely ridiculous, and I think it definitely is deserving of the #1 spot on this list. #2 on this list by score is actually Shockwave Totem at 17 out of 20 points. And I also actually very heavily agree with this. I think it's a very underdog level skill. I don't know if this is an old video of mine, but back in Total League, I played this as a 10 div character for farming Sanctum and absolutely fell in love with its performance. And even after the nerfs that it's gotten, it still is performing extremely well. Very very good damage, very good play style. This would be probably my #1 candidate for should Hexblast eat the dust. This is what I would probably look at if I were just looking to be a low budget Sanctum farmer again in a future league. The only gripe that I really have with this character is that I do not like it for all content. Has a lot to do with totems in particular and not a lot to do with the skill. The skill performs fine, although I would like some more AoE if I were to play it in mapping. Also, just as a quick note, the fact that it is reliant on an actual projector to really get to where it's going is a little bit of an interesting hang up if you are looking at this in either on League Start or if you're, in a private league or an SSF. Whatever it may be, that's a reason for you to maybe reconsider, right? Also, just as a small note, this build, as opposed to Hexblast, does not have nearly as much flexibility. You are pretty much locked to Hierophant. You can do this on Elementalist, Assassin, and Ascendant as well, but I would heavily recommend against it compared to Hierophant, simply because of the totem quality of life it provides through the 100% totem places fee that it gives you as an ascendancy. That is absolutely insane, and you never really think about how nuts that is until you don't have it. So there's that. Next up on the list, Penance Brand of Dissipation, 16 out of 20 points on the list, really only taking knocks in the cost department. And that's because this is the perfect high investment skill. If this list were based off of what do you do when you have a Mage Blood plus 250 div on your hands to make a character, I'm recommending you Penance Brand of Dissipation for Sanctum every single time. It is by far the best scaling skill on this list. It is by far one of the best feeling skills on this list when you do have that level of investment, right? When you do have that insane cast speed, when you do have that good duration, when you do have the brand attachment range. A friend of mine, Simon, he played at this league with so much brand attachment range that it actually looked like old Cyclone, but for attachment range. Like old Cyclone as in like 3.7, like Legion League, like screen size Cyclone. Yeah, that was his attachment range. Like, that's an insane level of scaling that really makes the build feel absolutely insane. It's also able to be flexible among content types because of its high damage profile. You can play it tankier. You can make it T17 viable. You can do Uber bosses on it. You can do regular mapping. You can do Valdo's mapping on it. It's a very, very flexible character, even after the 70% nerf at 8. Because it turns out when a skill is busted and then you bug fix it to double its damage, nerfing it by 70% after that point, it's only really a 30% nerf, and this skill was way more than 30% above the crowd, let me tell you. Very, very good skill. Very much recommend it. Next up, Bama. 15 out of 20 points. Another insane skill. I would put this right behind Hexblast in terms of skills that are very well put together for being all-arounders. It is a very, very well-rounded skill in the sense that it is a minion build, right? Minion builds just kind of do get a lot of everything you need. It's really hard to not end up with excess defenses. It's really hard to not end up with excess damage. It's really hard for a lot of things. The only thing that I particularly don't rate this highly on, if your list, is I felt like its speed was a little bit lacking. And that's really the only, like, just not a fan. The speed of the character needs some work just because, again, Blink Arrow and Frostwing for movement is not my favorite, especially when there's Lightning Warp on the table, or even high investment Leaf Slam would definitely give this like a good mollywopping in terms of like character speed. But otherwise, very beautiful. Can be played either Elemental or Poison on either Guardian or Necromancer. Really your choice. And it's worth noting, you can even play Elemental Necromancer if you really want to get into it. That's a whole other thing. I'm not here to give you the build guide, just here to put the ideas in your mind. And lastly, out of these skills that we rated here, I have more skills to talk about in the next section. But lastly, out of the 5 skills we've been talking about so far, SRS, 9 out of 20. I hate this skill. 9 out of 20, and I want to make it very clear, 9 out of 20 does not mean that the skill is unviable in the Sanctum. It is still very viable in there. I simply do not think it compares at all the rest of the field. It's just not fast. It's not high damage. The playstyle sucks with the amount of casting it needs to do for the lack of coverage that it gets, right? Cast per second relevant to map coverage per cast is just not really my thing. This is definitely just a character that is a good recommendation, or another good point of a functional character that can be moved out of regular content and into the Sanctum. But overall, all 5 of these skills are fantastic options for Sanctum, but I definitely would stay away from SRS, and I would definitely lean towards Hexblast Mines in most scenarios. If you've got Giga money though, hey, yo, pick up the Penance brand. Now that we've talked about that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other skills and other things worth knowing about. Speaking of underrated skills, really just underrated or under-acknowledged, whatever you want to call them. These are skills that I think are perfectly fine in Sanctum that you're not going to see a lot of coverage on because, you know, there's just like a lack of guides for them, or they think that they're too weak, or just not people's first thoughts on them. I'm going to run through these in kind of a rapid fire fashion where I'll give you the skill and I'll give you why I think it actually could be very strong in Sanctum. Some of this is obviously subject to testing, but just to give you the general idea. Starting up with number 1, Firestorm of Pelting. I think this skill is absolutely insane damage-wise. I have thought this since it was announced, quite frankly. When I first did the damage numbers on it, I was like, holy shit, this skill's insane. And I still haven't gotten around to play it myself, but then I got to see Dan play it in Affliction League, where it was just unbelievable the amount of damage he's done with it. I've seen it done poison, I've seen it done hit. This skill has incredible damage. It's a little bit backloaded though, and that's my one concern with it in Sanctum, but it definitely could work. Ascendancy options, Trickster, Elementalist, etc. This also leads very nicely into the second build type that I'm going to talk about here, which is just Archmage builds in general. Archmage builds get a lot of coverage and a lot of damage, and so Archmage Firestorm Pelting can also definitely be an option, but also more specifically say like Ice Nova or Frostbolt. It's worth noting that skill you would need to make sure you take off your MTX because you want to be able to actually see in the Sanctum. That's a very important part of being able to run the content, as well as, you know, could probably do like Ball Lightning. There's probably even some funny stuff with other skills like maybe BFPB, for example. Archmage is very, very strong at the moment, and there's definitely spells that would benefit from the amount of damage and AoE scaling that it provides in terms of ability to run Sanctum. Next up, Tornado Shot. This is a bit of an oldie. It's not like people have just completely forgotten that Tornado Shot exists, but I do think it's worth like rehashing that. Like, hey guys, Tornado Shot is a real skill. It's still very strong. It never actually went anywhere. You can play it. You can also play Ice Shot of Penetration through like arrows setup that you get. Ice Shot of Penetration minor, either Trickster or Deadeye. I think both of them are perfectly fine. And both of these skills work very well. I am personally more biased towards Tornado Shot. This has to do specifically with the ability to use Omni very efficiently. What this I end up specializing in very efficient is just clearing the full screen prior to its nerf, as well as the release of Penance Brand of Dissipation. This was definitely the highest investment Sanctum runner you could get, where you would go Physis, Cold, Omni, Tornado Shot, and that was the way that you would just absolutely annihilate the Sanctum. Like, absolutely annihilate it. It was honestly super impressive. Very much a fan of that type of character, so I wanted to give it a shout out here as an option, right? Similarly, in this vein, Lightning Strike. Not Vol Lightning Strike, but Lightning Strike. The reason I said not Vol Lightning Strike has to do with the fact that I don't know if I like the idea of the randomly returning projectiles thing yet in Sanctum. The lack of control is a little unappealing to me. And the need for absurd shotgunning, that's not really what you want. You do just kind of want to let the projectiles do their thing, and I think that Lightning Strike might actually have the damage. I do not know. I have not POB'd it at that level currently, just because I haven't had a whole lot of time to just jam POBs left, right, and center like that. But I think that Lightning Strike, again, scaled through Omni, like definitely has the range to possibly be a contender. I'm a little concerned about its potential single target, unless you can get its quick burst single target into like the 85-90 million range with very little actual active combat ramp time for boss checks. But I think it definitely is worth looking into. If you're an LS character, you might actually be perfectly fine to do Sanctum anyways. If you're, you know, say SS7, you don't want to reroll another character just to run Sanctum, this is a very viable option. Next up, Spark. A skill that definitely has gone nowhere in terms of like people's willingness to try to make it work. If at high enough investment, definitely a great Sanctum character. It is a little bit random, and I think it's fallen off a little bit. Like, I wouldn't play it over a lot of the skills that I've named before, both in this list and just in the video overall, due to the fact that I think other skills have similar, if not better, coverage with much better speed and much better control over it. But on good prot speed investment, it does really start to get up there. It just takes a lot of money to do it, and you are doing it out of a labor of love. It does absolutely annihilate battle arena rooms though, because you do just get to sit there and spam. It's very beautiful. Spark was also actually the skill that I learned the Sanctum on, so I do always have a soft spot in my heart for it. You know the deal. Next up, Wave Blast of Unloading. The AoE on this skill leads me to believe that it has to be good in Sanctum. It's just one of those things where the ability to turn it into a playstyle that is mostly a walking playstyle with a one button just activate it all type of deal, and just have it absolutely nuke screens, means that this has to be good in there. I'm not exactly sure how it will be good in there, right? Like, I don't have the details off the top of my head. But the POBs that I've seen for BB of Unloading do get that insane levels of damage that I want. It's a skill that is Fizz and therefore can be converted. It's got another Fizz converted skill, which means it's also legally insane. Like, it's definitely got all of the right things that can make it nuts. And so before I close out this video, I want to kind of leave you with this thought here, which is I named a bunch of extra skills because I think it's more important that you see this video not as what skills should I be playing in the Sanctum, but rather what makes a skill that I want to be playing in the Sanctum, and as in like focus on the qualities of the skills, not the skills themselves, because nerfs are always a possibility, but also more importantly, sometimes you just don't want to play these things, right? Like sometimes you want to actually get a little creative, get a little funky with it, and under that guise of wanting to get a little funky with it, I think that you should be aware of some of the other ways that you can make skills work, because all you really need, again, is high damage, high speed, enough money to put the character together, and a play style that's very efficient for ignoring enemies, right? As long as you have all of the above there, your build is definitely completely viable in Sanctum, and you're bound to have a good time. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Hexblast is the undisputed king of Sanctum yet again. Hexblast mines really just stay on top. GGG if you're listening. No, you're not. Anyways, that's it for me. Again, if you found this video particularly helpful, or you just wanted to add anything, maybe suggest some more skills to talk about or whatever it may be, drop those in the comments. Also, like and subscribe, turn notifications on so you know when we post more. We do have a Twitch and a Discord in the description, which, of course, speaking of the Twitch, this weekend, starting at sometime in the afternoon. I don't remember the exact time off the top of my head right now. It'll probably pop up on the screen. BPL will be starting, and I'll be streaming pretty much the whole event, at least whenever I'm awake and not super groggy, right? But we'll be streaming most of the time during the event, so come hang out, you know, watch me go absolutely insane, doing even more Sanctum than I've already done this league, all that good stuff. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.